I've been married to my husband for 7 years, 7 beautiful years filled with love, laughter, and the joy of raising two amazing children. Our life together has been built on shared moments, weekend adventures, quiet late night talks, and the comfort of his hand holding mine. But lately, things seem different, as if a heaviness has settled over us. The energy we once shared feels distant, like we're slowly drifting apart. The spark that used to ignite whenever we locked eyes seems dimmer now, and the playful laughter that used to fill our home has become rare. It feels like we're losing that special connection that made us so drawn to each other when we first met, the passion that once burned brightly between us, now flickering as if it's struggling to stay alive. 9 years ago, I encountered my husband at a house party organized by one of our mutual friends. The room was alive with energy, loud music pulsating through the walls, colorful lights flickering across faces, and a constant buzz of voices rising above the beat. Yet, even in the midst of the chaos, my attention kept drifting to him. From the moment I laid eyes on him, I was completely captivated. He stood out like a calm island in the middle of a bustling sea, leaning casually against the wall with a drink in hand. His effortless calm, the way he seemed so relaxed and cool, contrasted sharply with the frenzied energy around him. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was just who he was, and that made him all the more intriguing. I was 25 then, still full of the kind of restless excitement that made you want to dance until dawn. He was 30, a few years older, with a mature composure that came through in the way he carried himself. There was a quiet confidence about him, as if he had already seen a bit of the world and wasn't easily fazed. I found myself sneaking glances at him for most of the night. My gaze lingering on the way, he would tilt his head back in laughter or casually run his hand through his hair. There was something about the way he moved unhurried, deliberate, that made him seem like he had all the time in the world. I couldn't stop staring, even though it seemed like he hadn't noticed me at all. He spent the evening effortlessly mingling, his deep voice rumbling through casual conversations with friends and acquaintances. I watched as he talked to everyone around me, his laughter mixing with the music, while I waited for his eyes to finally meet mine. But it felt like I was invisible, just another face in the crowd. The longer I watched, the more convinced I became that he wasn't interested. I told myself it was foolish to hope, and just as I resigned myself to the idea that he wouldn't even look my way, something unexpected happened. He turned and suddenly our eyes locked. There was a moment, just a breath, when the world seemed to go silent, the music fading into the background, and all I could see was him. His gaze was steady and curious, as if he had known I'd been watching all along. Then he spoke. "Hello, what's your name?" he asked, his voice deep and smooth, with a hint of amusement that made me wonder if he had been aware of my glances the whole time. That simple question, spoken as if it was the most natural thing in the world, sent a thrill rushing through me. My heart raced as if it had been waiting for that moment all night, and from then on, everything changed. That night was the beginning of a beautiful life we would share over the years. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of texting and late-night phone calls, much more than I could have imagined. We fell head over heels for each other, and 2 years later, we got married. I can never forget our wedding day. It remains one of the most remarkable days of my life. Everything felt perfect. The sunshine just right. The decorations were breathtaking, and the air was filled with love and joy. The memories of that day occupy a cherished place in my heart, a reminder of a time when everything seemed magical. Our romance was everything a woman dreams of, intense, intoxicating, and filled with a depth of connection that words could scarcely capture. The intimate side of our relationship was no exception. It was a world unto itself where time seemed to stand still and nothing else existed but the heat between us. My husband had a way of making me feel utterly desired, as though every inch of my skin craved his touch and his touch alone. When his hands traced the curves of my body, it wasn't just a caress. It was like an electric current that coursed through me, igniting sensations that sent shivers cascading down my spine. His fingers knew exactly how to awaken even the quietest corners of my being, stirring emotions that surged up from some uncharted depth within me. It was as though each stroke and kiss reached past the surface, sinking into my very soul, where it would echo and thrum for days after. The warmth of his body against mine was something I would get lost in, a kind of heat that wrapped itself around me and drew me closer, making me feel safe and yet vulnerable at the same time. I would lay there afterward, my skin still tingling from where his lips had been, letting the memories of our moments together replay over and over again in my mind. It was like revisiting a beautiful private movie, every scene vivid with the texture of his breath on my neck and the way his voice would dip to a low murmur, sending sweet tremors through my chest. Each time we touched, it wasn't just about pleasure. It was about the passion that made me feel truly alive, reminding me of the powerful connection we shared. But lately, something had shifted, and I could feel it like a chill in the air. There was less of everything. The light in his eyes when he looked at me, the playful touches that used to spark up in the middle of the day, the way our conversations would flow naturally and effortlessly from one topic to another. The once magnetic pull between us had faded into the background, and where there had been heat, there was now a kind of quiet distance that grew with each passing day. It was as though a shadow had fallen over us, dimming the vibrancy that used to light up our love. And I couldn't help but wonder, with a pang of fear and sadness, what had gone wrong and if there was a way to find our way back to where we once were. I knew that with time, physical attraction could wane in a marriage, but this felt different, too obvious, too stark. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were drifting apart, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, nothing seemed to change. Week after week, the distance between us grew, and I began to resent him. It was a quiet resentment that festered in the silences between us, making every conversation end in arguments and every disagreement worse than the last. This went on for months until one evening. After a silent dinner that hung heavy in the air, I finally asked him what was wrong. Why had there been so much misunderstanding between us? For the first time in what felt like ages, he opened up. He told me about the challenges he was facing at work, how several problems had emerged with the projects his company was handling, causing a government agency to freeze payments. I was shocked to learn about the strain this had put on him, his mind constantly weighed down by concerns about budgets and the pressure to keep things running smoothly. I asked him why he hadn't told me sooner, and his response broke my heart. I tried to, he said, but every time I saw how exhausted you were from managing the house and taking care of the kids, I felt I should handle it on my own. I felt crushed. All this time, I had been angry and resentful without realizing that the man I loved had been struggling under the weight of problems he didn't want to burden me with. Determined to make things right, I threw myself into rekindling the spark that once set our relationship ablaze. I couldn't fix his work problems or make the government release the payments, but I could bring warmth and love back into our home. I spent the next few days thinking of ways to make him feel cherished again, the kind of attention and affection that had once come naturally between us. I read books on intimacy, devouring their secrets as though each word was a magic spell that could revive what we had lost. I even ordered a few sets of lingerie, delicate lace that felt like silk against my skin, and some seductive new fragrances that promised to linger in the air and stir up memories. I was determined to be the wife who could make him forget his troubles, if only for a little while. But I wasn't the only one making plans. Unbeknownst to me, my husband had been quietly orchestrating something of his own. Since our heart-to-heart conversation, I had noticed subtle changes in him. Small, but significant. It was as if an invisible weight had been lifted off his shoulders, and he seemed more like the man I fell in love with, the one whose laughter was contagious, whose gaze could make me feel like the only woman in the world. There was a glint in his eyes that had been absent for so long, a quiet joy that made my heart flutter whenever I caught him looking at me. His smile was no longer strained, but natural and easy, like the warmth of the sun after a long winter. That weekend, just as the packages I had eagerly ordered arrived, he surprised me by taking the initiative. It was Saturday morning when he entered the kitchen with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "I've made arrangements for the kids to spend the weekend with one of our family friends," he said, as casually as if he were announcing the weather. "Get ready," he continued with a playful grin that melted away any tension I still carried. "We're going on a picnic." For a moment, I was speechless, caught off guard by his spontaneity. It had been far too long since he had made plans for just the two of us, and I could feel a giddy excitement bubbling up inside me, spreading warmth to my cheeks. "Dress up in your best," he added, winking as he leaned in close. My mind raced to the new dress I had bought recently, a sultry off-shoulder number that hugged my curves. The slit ran provocatively from my knee down, teasing a glimpse of my leg with every step. I knew he would love it. He had always had a thing for off-shoulder dresses, claiming they sent messages to his brain that he couldn't ignore. I hurried upstairs, my heart beating with anticipation as I pulled out the dress and slipped into it. The fabric felt smooth and cool against my skin, fitting snugly over my figure as if it had been made just for this moment. Underneath, I wore the new lace underwear I had bought, a touch of elegance and seduction that made me feel desirable and bold. As I spritzed the hint of my new perfume onto my neck, the sweet, musky scent curled through the air like a whispered promise of passion. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alive, ready to step into whatever the day might bring. When I came downstairs to meet him, his eyes lit up as though he were seeing me for the first time, a look of raw appreciation in his gaze that sent a thrill coursing through me. His stare lingered on me, taking in the way the dress hugged my body, its soft fabric caressing every curve and accentuating the sway of my hips. There was a moment of stillness before he moved, as if he were savoring the sight of me. And then, with the children gone and the house blissfully silent, he closed the distance between us in a heartbeat. He didn't waste a moment. His strong arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me close until our bodies met with a subtle, magnetic force. His hands glided down the arch of my back, his touch firm and possessive, before they found my hips and gripped them tightly. The sensation of his fingers pressing into the fabric and the way the dress clung to my skin sent shivers racing down my spine. His warmth seeped through the thin material, setting my skin alight as he drew me even closer. I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my chest, and his breath, hot and heavy, mingled with mine. He kissed me deeply, passionately, with a hunger that seemed to have been building up for far too long. His lips were soft but insistent, moving against mine in a way that made my whole body ignite with longing. His hands roamed over my curves, squeezing me closer with a mixture of urgency and tenderness that left me breathless. I could feel the heat of his palms through the dress, each touch awakening something dormant inside me. It felt as though a fire was spreading, starting where his hands met my body and fanning out to every inch of my skin. I wanted him right there and then, the desire coursing through my veins like liquid fire, but he didn't rush. Instead, he took his time, letting his lips wander from my mouth, trailing a heated path down to my neck. I tilted my head back, giving him more access as his lips brushed against the delicate skin there, each kiss feeling like a jolt of electricity. It was as if his mouth were leaving tiny sparks wherever it touched, igniting sensations that made my skin tingle and my mind whirl in a haze of pleasure. He moved lower still, his lips grazing the curve of my shoulder, the combination of his breath and the cool air against my skin making me shudder. My breath came faster as his fingers slipped beneath the hem of my dress, exploring the bare skin of my thighs before moving with a skilled touch to the most sensitive spot between my legs. His fingers danced over me, teasing and playing with a rhythm that made my knees tremble. I couldn't hold back any longer. A deep, unfiltered moan escaped my lips, echoing through the quiet house. It felt liberating to let go, to give voice to the pleasure that was building inside me, knowing there was no one else around to hear. Finally, he entered me, his body pressing into mine with a slow, deliberate motion. I wrapped my arms around his neck, clinging to him as I felt the fullness of his presence inside me. His warmth radiated through me, filling every inch of me with a sensation that was almost overwhelming. Each slow, measured thrust felt intimate, as if he were pouring all his love and passion into each movement. His pace was unhurried, almost reverent, as though he wanted to make every second last, to draw out the pleasure until it bordered on exquisite torment. I held him tighter, pulling him closer with each push, as if I could somehow make us one, wishing that the moment would stretch on forever. When he finally withdrew, he told me to take it on my face. I obeyed, and he released all over me, his warm essence marking my skin. I looked up at him, catching the satisfied smile on his lips, and I knew that this was exactly what I had been craving for so long. It felt as if a heavy fog had lifted from our relationship, and in that instant, I realized my man was truly back. The spark that I thought we had lost had been reignited, and it felt more intense than ever before. It was more than just a physical connection. It was a renewal of our bond, a reminder of why we fell in love in the first place. As I lay in his arms afterward, I couldn't help but feel hopeful about our future, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we could face them together.